Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Special Parent Connection workshop about the Fall 2020 plan. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that this is a 30-minute workshop. The beginning of the workshop will be about 10 minutes of information based upon questions that the community has been asking about this specific topic. Then there will be about 20 minutes designated to a question and answer period. If you have any questions for the panelists, please use the question and answer or the Q&A tab on your screen. Please keep in mind we may not have time to answer all your questions, but we will work hard to get as many questions answered as possible. And remember to visit our FAQs on the vbschools.com website. My name is Dr. Admin Alexander. I am the Director of the Office of Family and Community Engagement, and I am extremely excited to have our panelists here today. First, our panelist, Ms. Ronnie Myers-Daub, Executive Director of Programs for Exceptional Children, and Tanya Sotomayor, Director of Compliance and Special Education. Thank you both for joining us today for this special edition. They have joined us today to share information on special education. We hope that this information answers questions that you may have and provide you with additional resources to help you during this time. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Myers-Daub. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, and thank you for joining us. This evening's session will address questions related to special education, those that have been submitted to us in advance of this evening, as well as we will be monitoring the Q&A. We also encourage you to visit the FAQ in reference to the Fall 2020 plan on the Virginia Beach City Public Schools website, as we will continue to update those, specifically also related to special education. And just to review, we know that all of you have a decision to make related to the option that you are going to choose for your child. Option 1 is face-to-face learning, which does include the social distancing and safety measures that will be in place. It will move to a temporary virtual learning. It will transition to temporary virtual learning when necessary, and we will return when it is safe to return to face-to-face learning. And as you know, that we will start the school year off in virtual learning. Option 2 is 100% virtual learning through the Virtual Learning Center. And this is a fully online K-12 school option for the 2021 school year. And students enrolled in the VLC will be assigned to Virginia Beach City Public Schools teachers and receive instruction through a variety of online platforms, including Virtual Virginia, Edgenuity, Virginia Beach Digital Campus, and Schoology. And just a reminder, if you select option 2, the Virtual Learning Center, the students must remain in that for the first semester. So also, just to review some differences between the emergency learning plan, which is how we ended our school year from March until June, and then what will look different for the fall of 2020. So as a reminder, for the spring, the curriculum, instruction, and pacing was revised in response to recovery. Well, as we move into the fall, curriculum, instruction, and assessment and pacing will be created in response to recovery as well as learning loss. We will also look at remediation and acceleration to address student needs. It will be embedded in their daily schedules. Also, one of the biggest differences between the emergency learning plan and the fall 2020 plan is in the emergency learning plan, the focus was on asynchronous instruction. However, moving into the fall, synchronous instruction will predominantly be the way in which teachers will interact with students. There will be some asynchronous instruction in place, but the emphasis will be placed on synchronous instruction. During the emergency learning plan, feedback was provided to students on assignments, and assignments were not graded. However, moving in again to the fall 2020, assignments will be graded and there will be feedback provided. Assignments will be used to determine grades or proficiency scores, and feedback will be provided to all students to ensure it aligns and ensuring that it aligns to grade level practices. Also, during the emergency learning plan, participation was monitored But as again, we move into the fall 2020 instructional plan, participation will be monitored and attendance will be counted. Okay, so at this time, we are going to begin to answer questions. And the first one that I'm gonna ask of Tanya is, explain how IEPs will be implemented for a student enrolled in the VLC.
So if parents choose option 2, which is enrollment in our virtual learning center, the IEP team will meet to discuss any needed modifications to the IEP. The IEP team will discuss delivery of service as well as accommodations that are needed in the virtual setting. Students with disabilities will continue to receive their special education services as outlined in their IEP. The goals will be addressed during their virtual instruction. Explicit instruction with clear expectations and practice will be provided to support students receiving virtual instruction. In addition, students will receive access to instructional materials, assistive technology tools, and anything else as required by their IEPs. So you will be contacted by your case manager to hold an IEP meeting to have those discussions. We have another question, Dr. Myers-Daub. If a parent chooses option 1, how will IEPs be implemented during the temporary virtual instruction?
Okay, and as Ms. Sotomayor just shared, and IEP meetings will be held at the beginning of the year. So in this situation, if a parent chooses option 1, an IEP meeting will be held to discuss the services a student will receive during that temporary virtual instruction. So the case manager and the special education teachers assigned to the child's school will be the ones that will be providing the special education services during that transition to any temporary virtual instruction. The case manager will create a schedule for each student on their caseload in order to ensure services are delivered on a weekly basis. So case managers will also collaborate with the general education teachers to plan for that specially designed instruction, to build that into the lesson plans, and also to provide any necessary modifications to assignments as needed. Okay, so Tanya, the next question is related to extended school year. So we had some students that attended ESY this summer face-to-face. So address how students were able to receive extended school year services in a face-to-face format, but are not able to return to face-to-face in September.
Okay, yes, so we had a small number of students whose parents chose to let their students receive ESY, extended school year services during the summer in a face-to-face format. Because it was a small number, factors such as transportation, social distancing, health mitigation measures, and cleaning were able to be managed. The school division closely monitored the health metrics and is continuing to monitor those in order to ensure we can bring all the students back when it's safe to do so.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Let me ask you the next question. What supports will be provided to special education teachers to ensure a clear understanding of the expectations related to IEP meetings and instruction?
So special education teachers will be provided training through their assistant principal as well as special education coordinators on holding the IEP meetings at the beginning of the year to address the needs of students, whether it's the temporary virtual instruction or whether a parent has selected the option 2 of the virtual learning center. So those IEP modification meetings will be held at the beginning of the year to address that. We will also be providing special education teachers professional learning related to providing that virtual specially designed instruction through that synchronous environment. We do understand that some parents have shared with us that they felt that their child struggled during the springtime when we were focusing on that asynchronous instruction. However, again, as we're moving forward to the fall, we are going to be emphasizing the synchronous instruction. So we will be addressing the needs of the students in the IEP meetings being held at the beginning of the year. Okay, so there's been a lot of questions related to related services. and if they will continue to, and if students will continue to receive these services during virtual instruction until they can return to the face-to-face environment.
Yes, so again, the IEP team will meet and they will be having discussions about what services will look like in a virtual setting. During the springtime, speech services, occupational therapy services, and some level of consult PT services were provided in a virtual format. So again, the IEP team will meet and discuss what that looks like until we can get back to the face-to-face setting.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
is it okay?
How will the needs of students who receive special education services in a special education setting be met?
Okay. So again, after you have those meetings at the beginning of the year to address the option that was selected and in reviewing the needs of your child, students will receive the instruction through a special education teacher to address the services listed on the IEP. This may not look the same as it did in a brick and mortar setting. It may be done in small group setting. It may be done one-on-one with the teacher, just depending on the needs of the child. The IEP team will meet to discuss any of those necessary modifications to the IEP to address instruction while the division is operating in a virtual setting. All right, so there's been some questions also about students that struggled in the virtual instruction environment as we ended school between March and June. So if a parent has concerns about their child participating in instruction during the fall, what should they do?
So if the student is experiencing difficulty, whether that's work completion, social, emotional needs, whatever the case may be, the parent should immediately contact the case manager or the assistant principal that oversees special education for their child's school and request an IEP meeting so that the team can discuss strategies that may be beneficial to the student during that virtual instruction. Okay, so let me rephrase that. For students with disabilities whose parents have chosen option 1 and may return before the non-disabled peers, will their case manager change once all students return to school? Or will the case manager that was initially signed be the same throughout the school year?
Okay, so for option 1, if a parent chooses option 1 for their students, they will be assigned a case manager from their school of attendance. And as we transition to that temporary virtual instruction, which again, we are starting out at the beginning of the year, the case manager should be the same as the case manager that was assigned from the school. All right, so it looks like we skipped a question if I'm looking at this. So how will the needs of students who are unable to access their education via virtual instruction be addressed?
So the IEP team will meet to discuss the needs of students who are demonstrating any type of difficulty. They may need to consider additional supports when face-to-face instruction resumes. And certainly the case manager during the virtual instruction can provide some additional supports too that are more individualized for that child. Sorry, I'm having difficulty scrolling. Which one am I?
Looks like we have a question related to CSAP.
Oh, sorry, thank you. When will students served in CSAP have the option to transition to in-person instruction?
So again, when you look at the health indicators that have been established by the division in consultation with a group of physicians, students served through any of the programs in CSAP whose parents selected option 1 face-to-face, they will have the option they will transition to in-person instruction when the Eastern region is in the yellow zone. So Tanya and I have both been collaborating with administrators in CSAP. So they are closely monitoring what Virginia Beach is doing. We have shared communications with them so that they are able to also communicate with their parents, similar to what's been provided to the parents in the comprehensive school settings. Okay, so for option one, when will students with disabilities return to in-person instruction? So this is a little similar to the one we just talked about, but we'll go into a little bit more detail related to that.
So the school division is using the Eastern Region health metrics. So there are times in the Eastern region when only certain student groups might be in school. The first grade levels to have the option to transition to in-person instruction will be pre-K through 6, pre-K through 5, 6th grade, and 9th grade. All students with disabilities will have the option to return to in-person instruction in these grade levels, including early childhood special education students as well as CSEP students. Other designated students in grades 7, 8, and 10 through 12 who require intensive supports will also be able to return to school when we return to yellow. The designated students are those students that require very intensive supports in order to access their education. VDOE defines intensive supports as students who receive more than 85% of their services as indicated on their IEP for special education. In an effort to ensure access, other students with significant needs, students with disabilities who receive level 2 services in the special ed setting will be the first group that we look at returning. Again, based on what the services are outlined in their IEPs. Those students who receive services the majority of their day in the special education setting, to include those students who receive services at CSEP, in our adapted academic foundations classes, our functional academic foundations classes, and some of our cross-categorical classrooms will be the ones that we will be looking at returning due to the need for those intensive supports.
One of the questions that just popped up related to that was related to students that receive services in the early childhood special education classes. So again, when we talk about students transitioning to in-person instruction, pre-K through 5, that does include students that are served in the early childhood special education classroom.
Yes. Who should a parent or guardian contact if during this temporary virtual instruction, or if they've chosen the second option of the virtual learning center? Who should they contact if they believe their student may have a disability?
So if a parent or guardian suspects that their child has a disability, they should contact the home school, ask to speak to the assistant principal overseeing special education so that they can take the necessary referral information. So along that line, there's been a lot of questions related to evaluations, because we do realize in March, when we had the mandated school closures, with schools being closed, we were not able to evaluate students with disabilities in the special education process. So will evaluations for students suspected of having a disability occur during virtual instruction?
Yes, so we actually have already begun face-to-face assessments. They have resumed and they will continue during the virtual opening of school. Meetings to determine eligibility under IDEA and Section 504 will continue to be held in a virtual format. And I saw, as I was mentioning 504, as 504 question popped up related to what support will I have to access to further support my child. So students with 504 plans, although not identified under IDEA and outside of special education, they will continue to receive support through their 504 plan, and they will continue to have eligibility meetings under Section 504 as well.
So it looks like, again, there was a question at the beginning related to how this year was going to look different from last year. And again, just reiterating what we talked about at the beginning, that there is going to be more of an emphasis on that synchronous instruction. So when you have those IEP meetings, you can talk about the difficulties your child may have experienced during the asynchronous part of instruction at the end of last year. But remember going in that it will be synchronous instruction this year. So that is live, real-time instruction where they will be able to interact with their teacher. So Tanya, I was going to say there's also a question here related to whether a child will receive accommodations if the parent selects only virtual.
And yes, so, students who are served with an individual education program, they will receive the accommodations and supports as outlined by the IEP team in their IEP. They will also receive instruction based on their goals in that IEP. Students with Section 504 plans will continue to receive accommodations as outlined in their Section 504 plans. Questions related to Section 504 can certainly go to Adrienne Day, who oversees Section 504. Specific questions related to students and their IEP needs can certainly go to the assistant principal overseeing special education at your child's school, as well as any of our special education coordinators in the Office of Programs for Exceptional Children. So there is, there are people you can go to get your questions answered as well.
There's also a question related to work experience. We do realize that we have quite a few students at the high school level that participated in a work experience, whether it was in the school building or outside of the school building. And again, as we transition back to face-to-face instruction in the yellow zone, we are going to have students in cohorts, and there will not be a lot of interaction among kids in different classes. So we recognize for that work experience instruction, we are going to have to rely on platforms such as Virtual Job Shadow that can provide activities that align to the work experience that is hopefully aligned to the transition plan in the student's IEP. So we recognize that will not be the same as that hands-on work experience that they have when they're in the building or when they're outside of the building, but we do know that we are going to be able to address those instructional needs through platforms such as Virtual Job Shadow. I was looking to see if there was any other questions that we missed, Tanya. So there's a question in here about students that require special equipment such as switch toys for communication if they don't have them accessible in the home.
So the IEP team should meet to discuss what particular assistive technology devices the student may require in order to access instruction, and that may be sending that device to the home so that the student can have access to it to complete their activities, to interact with the teacher during the synchronous lessons. So that is definitely something you'd want to discuss during your IEP meetings.
There's a question here also about small group instruction. And again, case managers and other special education teachers that are supporting students, they will be participating in whole group instruction with the general ed teacher. They will also be pulling small groups as well as working with students one-to-one depending on their needs as outlined in the IEP.
And I'm still seeing a lot of questions pertaining to if a parent chooses the virtual learning center option, will they have any interaction with anyone from their neighborhood school? And again, while it may be a case manager that is not necessarily assigned from their neighborhood school, the IEP meetings and the SEC meetings, so the special education committee meetings, will all be linked to the neighborhood school so that the school continues to know the needs of their students.
There's a question in here about the schedule. What will a schedule look like for a high school student in a self-contained setting? The schedule that has been shared for high school students, the students that are served in a self-contained setting, the schedule is going to be very similar. Obviously, it might look a little bit different, but the schedule will be similar. And yes, they will have contact with a case manager, depending on what option, whether you choose option 1 or option 2. It may not be the case manager that the student had last year, but they will have a case manager that you and the student can interact with and contact when you have some questions.
There was also a question related to students who have very intensive needs and may have difficulty accessing screen time for lengthy periods of instruction. That is definitely something that the IEP team will discuss during that IEP meeting about, length of time, ability to maintain, that instructional period, whether that's, only 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 10 minutes. That is something that the IEP team will want to discuss. And then certainly if your student is having difficulty, as we indicated before, that is when you want to reach out to that case manager and that assistant principal overseeing special education to schedule that IEP meeting so they can discuss if there's any additional supports that need to be.
So there's a question in here also about student receiving support in a particular content area if they're not able to attend an academic resource block. So those supports will still be available, but if your student is in a general ed setting for English and they require the support, that's listed on their IEP, there will be a special education teacher to provide those services. However, it may look different. And when we're in the brick and mortar, we have our special education teachers that push into the general education classroom to provide that support to students. In some situations, teachers are going to be able to still provide that support in that virtual general ed setting, but in other situations, they may have to pull a small group of students out to a virtual special education setting during the time that students are working independently to provide them additional support. So again, they're going to get the services, but it might look different in the virtual setting. I don't know if we have time for one more question. Let's see. Looking to see which ones we haven't answered.
There was a question that appears there was a little bit of confusion between what we did with the distance learning plan in the springtime and what we're doing now with the IEPs. She indicated that there was a reduction in the IEP goals that were addressed during the springtime. Yes, that was done during our school closure when we were implementing the distance learning plans. The virtual learning center is going to be done very differently in that the IEP, the goals that are on the IEP will be able to be addressed during that virtual instruction. And again, the IEP team will discuss during that IEP meeting how that will look, because it will look different. So all of the goals on the IEP will be addressed during virtual learning center instruction, if that's the option that is chosen.
Well, thank you, ladies. I have one more question for both of you. If I'm new to the special education services, who is on my IUP team?
That is a special education teacher that would be assigned as your case manager, a general education teacher of one of the students' classes, math teacher, English teacher, the assistant principal overseeing special ed, any necessary related service providers. And again, we would be pulling people from the neighborhood school as well, because there are families that may decide that come second semester, they want to go back to face-to-face. So we want to make sure that linkage is still there.
Thank you.
And also, we want to make sure that we've received a lot of questions that have been very student specific. So we encourage parents, if they have questions related to their child, to please contact the school. You can contact the case manager from last year. You can contact the building administration. If you need support from our office, you can contact the special education coordinator. We are here to answer your questions. But a lot of the questions that we've seen tonight are student specific. So some of those are best to be addressed individually. So please, feel free to reach out to the school or Office of Programs for Exceptional Children.
Thank you, Ronnie and Tanya. Thank you so much for your time today and your information. And also remember to visit our FAQs on vbschools.com to answer some of your questions as well. Well, we hope you enjoyed this engaging Parent Connection workshop. Please join us in a few minutes for another Parent Connection workshop dealing with Gifted Academy, hosted by Matt Delaney, the Executive Director for Secondary Teaching and Learning, and Nicole DeVries, Director of K-12 and Gifted Programs. And on this Thursday, join us for our second BB Safe Together community chat with Dr. Lakeisha Parrott, discussing the global crisis of homelessness and how our city and school division continue to address the needs of citizens without adequate housing and resources, as well as the Project Hope program. Thank you again, Tanya. Thank you again, Ronnie, for your time, and have a good night, everyone.